Great apes have become a commodity. Pushed to the brink through deforestation, hunting and disease, the great apes, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas in Africa and orangutans in Southeast Asia now face another sinister threat, an illegal live trade that feeds growing markets in Asia and the Middle East. They're smuggled in crates labelled dogs. They're stuffed into automobiles alongside drugs. They're carried in handbags, backpacks and suitcases, transported along waterways or shipped under falsified travel documents that defy common sense. But there's no doubt that great apes occupy a highly symbolic piece of the multi-billion-dollar global environmental crime. In 2013, the Great Apes Survival Partnership, or GRASP, published Stolen Apes, the first report to establish baseline data on the illicit trade. The publication analysed 7 years of seizure statistics to gauge the scale and the scope of the black market, which is estimated to have involved nearly 23,000 great apes from 2005 to 2011. Stolen Apes emphasises a chilling fact. What was once a haphazard trade that emerged as a byproduct of the bushmeat crisis, it's now a cold and sophisticated business with links to organised crime, facilitated by transnational criminal networks and fuelled by standing orders from abroad. The hunting of apes is driven by market demand. The continued loss of so many great apes in Africa and Asia could cripple the ecological health of those regions. Tougher law enforcement, stricter punishment, and a global awareness campaign that closes down both ends of the supply chain are required. Now, before it's too late.
Good afternoon and welcome to the monthly Great Ape Survival Partnership webcast, The Experts Speak. My name is Doug Cress and I am the coordinator of the Great Ape Survival Partnership. Today we'll be speaking about the illegal trade in great apes, a growing and complex problem that is one of the major issues confronting conservation in great apes in Africa and Asia. We have some special guests with us today on this webcast. I'll introduce them shortly. Before we do, though, I'd like to just run through a couple of news items that affect great apes and great ape conservation around the world, just to keep us updated on these webcasts. Currently, fires in Indonesia, triggered by the climatic conditions from El Nino, are causing tremendous damage across Southeast Asia. 125,000 people have suffered haze-linked ailments as a result of the fires that have broken out and the smoke and the haze that has covered really most of the Southeast Asian peninsula. Pollution is currently 5 times higher than the considered hazardous, and it could be weeks, if not months, before the climatic conditions return to normal. Of course, these fires and the haze is threatening wild orangutan populations in Borneo and Sumatra, the people who work in conservation in those regions, and also the rehab centers in Borneo and Sumatra and the captive orangutans that are in those facilities. It's a tremendously troubling problem, and it is one that is cyclical. This is now the third or fourth time El Nino has come through this region and caused such damage. In Africa, a new census of the mountain gorillas in the Bundi Impenetrable National Park in Uganda is currently underway. This is the first census since 2011, and as all censuses are, it's determined to make a more accurate count of the number of mountain gorillas in that park and in that country. And of course, as we've mentioned before on these webcasts, mountain gorillas are a shining example of the potential of ecotourism and the potential of careful management of populations. It's the only population of great apes in the world known to be rising in number. Very encouraging signs there, and we look forward to receiving those updated census numbers. As this webcast is about the illegal trade in great apes, it's worth ending with a small news item that is very relevant. Just last week, a pet store in Doha, Qatar, in the capital of Qatar in the Middle East, was actively selling 2 young chimpanzees in its front window. We at GRASP received a number of comments and emails and calls about the situation. Shortly after we were alerted to it, the owners of the pet shop actually went online and began to offer the chimpanzees for sale over the internet. We are working with Interpol and the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, to try and close down this particular sale. But it's a stark reminder that throughout the world, the illegal trade in great apes and the very open illegal trade in great apes continues. So now to turn to today's topic, illegal trade in great apes, with our guests, I'd like to introduce the 3 guests we have online with us today. First is Ofir Drori. He's the founder of the Eagle Network, which is the consortium or the alliance of law enforcement investigative agencies that runs really from West Africa right across to East Africa. He's joining us from here in Nairobi. We also have Claire Beastall. She is the training and capacity building coordinator for the Traffic Organization for Southeast Asia. She'll be joining us from Kuala Lumpur. And we have Bonaventure Ebayi. He's the director of the Lusaka Agreement Task Force. It's the intergovernmental organization that focuses on illegal trade throughout equatorial Africa with links around the world. So thank you very much to our guests for joining us today. And I think I would like to start by just framing some of this discussion. In 2013, GRASP produced this report, Stolen Apes, which was the first report that really began to put numbers to the scale and scope of the illegal trade in great apes. We've learned a great deal since then. That was a very, very a small step forward in terms of understanding the trade, and we're learning a great deal more, and we'll learn more from our guests today. But it was clear then, even with the very conservative numbers we used in stolen apes, that we had a serious problem on our hands, and that the illegal traffic in great apes is just one piece of a much broader network of the environmental crime crisis currently affecting the world, which is valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, is incredibly troubling, and apes are a highly symbolic piece of that illegal trade. Quite often the same organizations that deal in ivory and rhino horn and arms and humans and money and drugs are the same ones moving great apes. The difference, of course, is primarily the traffic in great apes is a live trade, because they hold a great deal of value in Asian markets and as part of private zoos and menageries, theme parks, and so forth. How damaging or how potentially crippling is the broader illegal trade in wildlife?
Well, of course, we're talking about huge industries. I can give an example from a recent case of ours just last month of a bird trader. And we can see connections to so many different countries, maybe 7 different countries immediately from the first interrogation that we have. Now we understand the quantities we are talking about are really in terms of a huge enterprise, an international enterprise. So definitely we are talking about something very developed, very damaging. When it comes to great apes, then of course even the smallest damage is huge for fragile populations. But I can give an example of a wild trafficker that has been put in jail due to our work, and he has been admitting to sell more than 500 chimps. So you can understand what this means in terms of harm to populations in the wild.
Well, that certainly is a potentially devastating scale of a trade. It is certainly something also, I think, with your work, Ofir, you found it moves increasingly across Africa to very different terrains and very different issues. Are you finding any commonalities between, say, the work you're doing in Benin or Togo and the work you're doing here in Kenya?
Well, 100%. I mean, what we can see with 8 countries where the Eagle Network is operating in 8 different projects, we can see the exact same pattern. So we understand that this is not a local issue. We are talking about international illegal trade, very well documented. Not something that is a new phenomenon, by the way. The same methods have been used for years, but we definitely see it getting worse and getting more intensified with more opportunities for international trade. So we can see the same kind of picture repeating itself in different locations. Very well organized trade, rooted in corruption, very well connected to government officials in times, very lucrative for them, and definitely damaging more and more wild populations.
Thank you for that. We'll come back to some of those points you made, including corruption, in a moment. I'd like to turn now to Claire Beastall in Southeast Asia. With many forms of illegal trade in wildlife and environmental crime, Asia is one of the drivers. It is certainly one of the destination markets in so many ways. Certainly that seems to be the case with great apes. I'm curious, what makes that such an attraction? Why are great apes so popular in Southeast Asia, and what are some of the trends and issues that you're confronting there in Malaysia, Thailand, and elsewhere?
I think great apes are very popular. They're very popular exhibit animals in zoos. I think they're popular almost all over the place. People really, really seem to like great apes. In Thailand, we've seen a number of these animals which have turned up in zoos and other wildlife attractions. We also have animals which we understand have turned up in China, and then the example you gave from the Middle East just earlier. And in fact, today there's been an announcement that a baby orangutan has been repatriated from Kuwait back to Indonesia. So this is a problem that affects a number of regions. In Southeast Asia, it appears that the majority of animals will end up in theme parks or in zoos or in other attractions, but there also is a market for them as pets. There were a number of animals, 2 animals seized in Malaysia just a few months ago as they were imported in from Indonesia.
Great. Well, thank you. In terms of that traffic to Asia, how is it possible to happen? If there are laws out there to protect great apes and other species that are under Appendix 1 of CITES, how is it possible so many are being trafficked? Is it simply corruption?
I think corruption, where corruption exists in a society, there's no reason to believe that it separates itself from the illegal wildlife trade. I think you also have a lack of awareness with some people not thinking that wildlife crime is a serious crime. And I think you have, even where there are laws, sometimes these are not applied to the fullest extent of the law. And for example, when they are, sometimes what will happen is the penalties which are meted out in court are not actually broadcast. So people, very often they will see information on a seizure, but then they never hear anything else about that. So they never hear what the consequences of that illegal trade are.
Thank you. I can see we're still trying to work on some of the technical difficulties with bringing in Mr. Ebayi from the Lusaka Agreement Task Force. So let me turn back to you, Ofir, for a second. In terms of wildlife crime being serious crime, that's a good leaping off point for some of the issues of follow-up. Seizing or confiscating an illegally trafficked ape is difficult enough, but I think you have a pretty good experience that also making an arrest, a prosecution, and successful conviction are incredibly difficult as well. But that is really where this has to go. Is it not true?
Yes, indeed. I mean, when we started about 13 years ago, we tried to see what is missing in the wildlife enforcement formula. Then we realized that, well, a lot of things that Claire was mentioning as secondary having secondary effect were still rooted in corruption. For us, every single thing was rooted in corruption, whether it's serious crime or not serious crime, whether the penalty is 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, it was still the same issue. The issue was that there was zero application of the law. And our assumption at that time, from our analysis, the first obstacle of wildlife enforcement was corruption. The second obstacle was corruption, and the third one was corruption as well. So by far, this is really the game we're talking about. Whether people are not informed, well, they will not be informed if the laws are not enforced. So what are they going to be informed on? And that's what we focused in. Now, years later, we have a very strong statistics that actually proves our assumption. More than 1,000 traffickers, major traffickers, put behind bars. We have very strong statistics on corruption because our job is to fight corruption during the arrests, fight corruption in courts, fight corruption in prisons. And our statistics is so strong as to say that 85% of our arrest operations with government officials in the field, we are documenting bribing attempts. 85%. Imagine how dysfunctional and difficult it is to get law and order in a system that does not produce law and order in at least 85% of the time. Now, obviously, we are not just a watchdog group, so we're trying to fight back. So we're fighting those 85% bribing attempts. In the court, we're talking about 80%. So 80% of the time we can tell you who was trying to bribe who, what judge was asking for what amount of bribe. Some of these are hidden recordings. And once again, we are there to try to fight it. But imagine how dysfunctional is a justice system. 80% of the time does not produce justice. So it will have to be a miracle for the law to be applied, and indeed that's exactly the situation we have. Majority of countries around the world cannot be proud of a single one wildlife prosecution in their history of the country. Can you imagine how shocking that is? We are sitting here talking about other secondary problems that we have. Until we solve the issue of corruption within the enforcement and justice systems, we are not going to do anything significant.
Thank you for that. I think we have Mr. Ebayi back online with us now from the Lusaka Agreement Task Force office, and I'd like to pick up on that theme with you, sir. How crippling is corruption, for instance, in Africa where you're working, and how long will it take before wildlife crime is considered serious crime to the point where we can get the sort of convictions and legal action that we need? So are you able to hear us there in Nairobi, Bonaventure? Okay. I think we're still having trouble with Mr. Ebayi in the Lusaka Agreement Task Force office. Sorry about that. Let me turn to some numbers quickly. We keep here at the Great Ape Survival Partnership a running tally of seizures around the world of great apes. Since in the last year and a half approximately, there have been 40 chimpanzees seized, 8 bonobos, 149 orangutans, and 7 gorillas. That works out to a staggering number of regular seizures. And it seems to be that the seizures are growing in number. Whether that means we're getting better at seizing legally trafficked apes or there are more to be seized, it doesn't matter in the sense that they are there to be seized. That traffic is ongoing. And using the word traffic, let me go back to Claire for a moment in Kuala Lumpur. Do you see the problem as getting worse, or we're just doing better at enforcing, or that we're doing better at discovering the depth?
It's actually very difficult to say what it is. Certainly, this is becoming more visible. I think probably as people are becoming more aware of it, I think there is increased enforcement effort in some places, but not in all. It is difficult to say. I'm sorry I can't give you a definitive answer. But it's very tricky to work out exactly if it's sort of increased enforcement or a larger number of animals. But certainly the trade does seem to be growing.
Well, in terms of seizures and when arrests do occur, let me turn back to Ofir for a moment, please. We have a number of questions that have come over the internet in the last few days prior to this webcast. This topic raised a great deal of interest, and a number of our viewers and supporters were wanting to put questions to the experts here. A number were asking about what happens in the legal system when someone is arrested. And there's a very good example of that ongoing right now in Guinea, where the former wildlife director of the West African state of Guinea was recently arrested in connection with a broad history of abuse of his office and certainly of trafficking in a number of endangered species. Could you just walk us through, please, Ofir, what the general process is for going from an arrest to a conviction, and where the hurdles might be?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just mentioned how difficult it is because of corruption to actually get somebody prosecuted. So indeed, large majority of arrests are simply ended up with a bribe and releasing that person. And I wanted to connect this 1 second to your real question to Claire about the rising numbers of seizures. Well, the answer for that would be easy, because if you have more seizures but you have no arrests, then you understand that you don't focus on reinforcement here. Okay, we've seen in the ivory trade, for example, that we have increased seizures due to tip-offs of rival syndicates. Simply, the trade is becoming better and stronger for all the people. Competition is stronger, and they're just battling each other, tipping off each other, and trying to break each other's business. For me, I don't see increased enforcement across the board at all. In fact, I see that we have a proliferation of conferences and talks, and indeed, as Claire was saying, very high awareness. But this awareness is not translated right now to real enforcement, as far as I can see. Back to your question about the process itself. So, if you do have an arrest of somebody who is caught red-handed with a chimp, trying to traffic that chimp, mostly that person, being rich as he is, being a businessman as he is, will manage to bribe his way. He may bribe the person who just arrested him in the airport. But if he can't, and if we have an honest guy in the airport, he still goes to the police commissioner and try to bribe the police commissioner. And if he can't, he still can bribe somebody else inside the police force. And if he can't, he still can bribe the person who forwards the file to the police, to the court. When the case goes to court, and you have a case file, you have a totally new game here. We have seen in courts in different countries where we operate, and also in other countries where we assisted and try to assess the situations, the same kind of picture. The court is built in a way where bribing opportunities can be many. We've seen, at least in some of the situations, where basically you could try to find any of the judges or of the prosecutors in the entire court and try to strike a deal with that person. That person will now take your file and ask for that file to be judged. Basically, many opportunities for you to offer a strike a deal on a bribe around the court. Even if you got prosecuted, this can take a few good months, and even if you did get to jail, you'll still be able to try to bribe your way out from jail. We have many cases where we monitor and check the prisoners and see that they are still there, and many times they are not. If you have the money, you can bribe your way out. So for us, it's an uphill struggle trying to increase enforcement unless you really hit the nail on the head, which is corruption and how to monitor corruption throughout this entire process, like a bodyguard almost against corruption. For us, getting an ape trafficker in jail otherwise will be a miracle. And statistics actually show that it still is a miracle because we don't see it.
Well, to many, your work so far is miraculous, so well done on that. You pointed out that there's a profile of the Eagle Network and Ofir Drori's work in today's New York Times newspaper, which is focusing on that case in Guinea. Let me take it back to Asia for 1 second, though, with you, Claire. Some of the questions we've gotten in, one from Ixel Barilar, was asking if the expansion of palm oil, which is a huge commodity in Southeast Asia and one of the drivers of economies in Malaysia, Indonesia, and elsewhere, if that expansion, in your opinion, has fueled the illegal trade, or it simply is just another development issue that runs parallel to it?
I think what the change, basically we're talking about a change in the habitat, and I think whether that change comes from conversion to plantation, whether it comes from removal of trees for logging, or clearance of land for mining, or for roads, or even for smallholders, removing forests so they can extend their farms, that's going to have an impact on the orangutans. And what it does is it puts them into increased conflict with people and puts them closer to people. So it's easier for any poacher to go out and actually find an orangutan, particularly if you have an area where animals are left stranded in small remnant patches of forest.
And that certainly is something to be wary of, because I think, as we've talked about in recent webcasts, many of the issues of development around palm oil that occurred in Asia or are occurring in Asia will soon come to visit Africa as the commodity expands into Africa. I think we do finally have Mr. Bonaventure Ebayi of Lusaka Agreement Task Force online with us, and I'd like to direct a question to you, sir. Wildlife crime has been classified now as serious crime, but I'm curious if you believe it has been taken on board as serious crime, and if countries are willing to commit the resources and the emphasis they need to really enforce these laws.
Thank you very much. Yes, sorry that I have not had the starting point of it, but concerning the issue of wildlife crime. I can say that currently most African countries have accepted it as a serious crime, similar to many other crimes which have been considered classically in the countries. One of the aspects here is the stimulation of the concept of wildlife crime into national laws as a serious crime. It has not been yet incorporated in the laws as a crime in most of the countries. But we have some countries who have already reviewed their laws and enhanced the penalties. Now there is two aspects here. Enhancing the penalties under the law do not make an offense a crime. So you can be able to review the law and enhance the penalties without making it a crime. But the most important aspect, as I heard with my friend Mr. Ofir saying, the most important is the law to recognize it as a crime, so that it is also treated as such in all the criminal justice procedures. But if you have high penalties within the law without the crime be recognized by the law as a crime, it is always treated as a petty offense. So the procedures to deal with it in the criminal system are also very lower level. So one of the main aspects we should be looking at is to assist most of the countries in Africa, particularly in Asia also, to make sure the law recognize wildlife offenses as criminal offenses. And this can be maybe categorized, especially when it comes to protected species. It should be recognized as a serious crime and a criminal offense within their laws. Then, for some other species, as they always say, it's not possible to just put all the species together and be seen as a criminal offense. But there is a need to categorize these offenses within their respective laws. If we want to focus on endangered species, for example, it is very important that we make sure all national laws and legislation capture it as an offense, a criminal offense, dealing with protected species. Only once. Yes.
Let me follow up with one thing, though. You mentioned a moment ago focusing on Africa and Asia, and Mr. Ebayi, we often talk in terms of illegal trade between a source country, a transit country, and a destination country. But it often feels as if Africa is blamed for the illegal trade in all wildlife, but certainly in great apes as well. 3 of the 4 great apes exist in Africa. I'm curious if you feel that perhaps Africa is being unfairly blamed for its role in the illegal trade.
I may not say unfairly blamed because African wildlife first belong to African countries. They are the first responsible for the management and conservation of the species within Africa and within the respective boundaries of the countries. It is a government responsibility for them to do that. So if governments are not putting enough on the table or prioritizing enough wildlife crime in their respective plans and programs in Africa, we cannot say they have been unfairly blamed. They share the blame. The blame is shared between the source countries and mainly the destination countries, because the destination countries constitute an opportunity for illegal traders. It is an opportunity for them. If there were no enough sufficient demand in wildlife species, for example, in wildlife specimen, then automatically the illegal killing in Africa will also go down. So this is why we need to work in the use, looking at the wildlife crime as a complex issue. We need to use also complex solution to be able to solve it. Complex solution meaning from the bottom to the top. So if we take the source as the bottom, then we need also to push it up to the top at the destination countries. The two have to work together, and if need be, to enhance criminal justice and to enhance the laws, it should be done on both sides, and in destination countries and in the source countries in Africa, so that anyone trying to deal with wildlife can face strange measures and the laws in the source countries and also in the destination countries.
A moment ago, Ofir Drori had talked about you needing a miracle to gain a conviction. One of the questions we've had from Carmen Iriarte Fernandez asking about what maximum penalties are out there for smugglers and for illegal traders. Wildlife crime, being a serious crime, should carry at least a 5-year sentence as a minimum, with that definition of being serious crime. But I'm curious, let me turn back to Ofir for a moment. What do you think would be a deterrent penalty or sentence that might begin to turn some of this trade in our direction, or our favor?
I don't think that changing the penalties at all makes any deterrent. If you know that you have 20 years in prison, but you know that nobody ever got to jail in your country, that'd be a deterrent. You know, it's a totally theoretic discussion that may entertain conferences and may entertain what Claire called increased awareness. But, you know, you cannot cut awareness. You cannot measure awareness. We are in a totally different kind of business here. We are talking about real criminals. And we all know what you need to do with criminals and how you fight with crime. When you have a mafia, you do not discuss about what you do with the mafia. You do not make more workshops, more conferences. You do not think, hey, maybe I'll make 30 years in prison for drugs. You just go there, and you catch them, and you put them in prison. It's a very quantified, very easily clear indicator whether you have done something or you have done nothing. And our feeling is that the majority of countries around the world are still doing nothing, completely nothing. So for us, law enforcement is really a number. And you know, you asked Bonaventure about Africa and whether Africa is to blame. So I want to put things a little bit more in perspective, because I've been several times in Brussels in discussions of the EU and European Commission about changing their laws and the way that they do enforcement. And I was standing there and showing them how many cases we have, and some of them are ape trafficking cases, moving from Africa to Europe. This is an international trade. It is not endemic to Africa, by definition. Okay, it is moving to other continents. So it is impossible that you think you have crime in Africa, you don't have it in Europe or in the US or in other places. So yes, for me, obviously, we need to put things in perspective and understand that what I was saying in the EU, in Brussels, was working with African authorities. Despite all difficulties, we still got more than 1,000 major wildlife traffickers behind bars. How many wildlife traffickers behind bars you think you have in Europe in the past 10 years? And I can tell you, you can count them on one hand. So, you know, numbers speak for themselves, and we need to understand that it's not about changing from 5 years to 10 years to 20 years to 30 years. It is about enforcement. In fact, this is theoretical. This is an academic question. Enforcement is an academic field as well. So this question was asked before. And the question, research question, is what matters more to traffickers? What matters more for criminals? The odds to get caught or the numbers of years in prison? Well, the answer from the academy is very clear. Okay, by far, the odds to get caught are a far bigger deterrent. Changing laws is easy. Changing laws is what we do when we get into and we go into conferences and we do processes for years and years and years. Catching traffickers is something different. We need to move from that system of theoretical discussions to actually demanding and fighting for getting those criminals that we can catch, know who they are, we can get into prison.
You mentioned statistics and data. The illegal trade in ivory and the killing of elephants has been well documented for over a decade now through the monitoring of the illegal killing of elephants, MIKE program that is operated by CITES. it's only recently we've begun to sort of put some numbers to the scale and the scope of the illegal trade in great apes. One of the things we're learning is that probably over 90% of all the seizures of great apes are occurring inside national borders. Therefore, they're never showing up in the databases that are managed by intergovernmental organizations or UN agencies on the broad level, CITES and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime or the World Customs Organization. Those only monitor international trade and international seizures. So very few are showing up, relatively very few. I'm curious to ask you, Claire, how hard has it been to compile data, and are you beginning to see some data and some numbers and some indicators that give us a sense of where we're going with the illegal trade in great apes?
It is, a lot of it is about reporting, and I know because you've been collecting information on seizures of great apes over the last few years, and I'm sure that there are seizures which occur.
I believe you've muted your microphone, Claire.
Okay, can you hear me now? My apologies.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I had mentioned that we are only beginning to realize that perhaps 9 out of 10 seizures is occurring inside national borders. Therefore, traditionally, those were not numbers or seizures that were showing up in international databases that of the sort that CITES or the World Customs Organization or the UN Office on Drugs and Crime maintain. So we're just beginning to get that picture. And I'm curious, for you there in Southeast Asia, are you starting to see any kind of numbers that give you a sense of where we're going in illegal trade?
I mean, a lot of it comes up to reporting. For example, seizures, it generally, very often seizures are not reported and they don't appear in the local press, or the authorities don't make it known that they've actually seized animals. Because this trade is illegal, the people who are involved in this keep it very quiet. So whereas in previous decades, maybe you would have seen animals for sale openly on the streets, that's now not occurring. And the trade generally is going further and further underground, making it much, much harder to actually quantify how much is out there.
And if I recall from some of the presentations and information I've seen from you, there's a fair amount of manipulation of the permitting and the sort of the documentation surrounding great apes. Is that correct?
Yeah, we had a look at the population of great apes in zoos and wildlife attractions in Thailand and Peninsular Malaysia, and although many of the animals that we saw a lot of orangutans in Malaysia, but we also saw a lot of orangutans in Thailand, and of course Thailand is not a range country for orangutans. And then when you look at the import statistics, the CITES trade database information showing how many animals have been sent with permits into the country, it really doesn't tally. For example, we found one gibbon in Thailand. There is no record of an import of that animal at all on the CITES trade database. So there are animals which are moving across borders and which are not being recorded at all.
If not mistaken, also countries such as India and Armenia are now popping up as hotspots, as transit countries. So it's continually shifting trade, as it seems, as well. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the wildlife trade is something that is not static. It's something where the people who are involved in this react to situations. Maybe they react to new infrastructure which allows more flights into a particular area. Maybe it's an area where they have friends who are working in customs. Maybe it's an area where they know that seizures have never been made. So wildlife criminals are extremely adaptable.
That's not good news. I'd like to turn to Bonaventure Ebayi for a second and ask a question. This came from well, several different of our listeners or our viewers. They want to know that, is there hope? You're working with a number of African countries, and do you have any hope, any reason to believe that we will be able to arrest the illegal trade in great apes before we lose entire species or certainly key populations?
Thank you very much. I still have hope that we will be able to save the situation if we are consistent in what we are doing, well coordinated, and also working in supporting each other in addressing the issue of trade, especially in great apes. One of the aspects which I will like to outline here, there is a need, absolutely. You know, the issue of crime, it is also an issue of behavior of people, understanding of the people. It is very important that we streamline the fight against wildlife crime, not only at agency levels, but we need also to criminalize it from the perspective of the school curricula, for example, to make a society where people understand that there is no need of going into crime, and also law enforcement to be able to deal with this issue friendly and strictly. The other aspect is, like my friend Ofir said, concerning the arrest. We are making a lot of arrests of criminals. Can I give an example just for the last month, 1 month Operation Cobra last year, where we had more than 300 arrests of criminals linked to wildlife crime. That doesn't really solve the situation if those criminals, as he said, are not behind bars, meaning if the prosecution of these criminals is not successfully done. So the system of enforcement, prosecution, and the conviction of the suspect is the end product. And it is very important for us to build on that aspect to make sure suspects who are arrested with criminal offense linked to wildlife, and specifically on great apes, are behind bars. This is very, very important key to be able to move forward.
You mentioned the arrest, and I just want to follow up on one thought there, Bonaventure. It's often said that poachers are incredibly well armed, well funded. They move like armies and very, very tactically. Are we able to keep up? Do we have the necessary resources and capacity and commitment to literally keep up with the criminals in these cases?
We have to differentiate 2 levels of the poaching currently happening, especially in Africa and in most of the developing countries. Where we are talking about criminal gangs moving very heavily armed, rebel groups, for example, involving in poaching. This is one of an aspect of the general trends of poaching from the general communities and members who are involved in trafficking for wildlife specimens. So it is very difficult for government, and as you know, most of this happen in Africa, where majority of governments are on developing countries. So it's not very easy for them to prioritize as it should be, especially in terms of fund mobilization, because to equip as the anti-poaching unit, for example, because you stop only not there. If we need to fight like in a war with these criminal gangs, then we are going to create armies within wildlife authorities, which is not the intention of most of the government, to transform the wildlife sector into an army fighting with gangsters. I think the aspect of insecurity or use of illegally acquired firearms in the continent, the proliferation of firearms, should not be an issue of wildlife law enforcers. It is an issue of the security of the continent, the security of the countries. So it has to be handled by security organs and the army, in my understanding, because it is not wildlife officer, wildlife law enforcement officer we are to go out there and start fighting with rebels gangs who are utilizing the wildlife for funding their activities. It's not easy to do that. So
no, that certainly is a commitment, though, on a level that does treat it as serious crime if you're going to mobilize an army to fight against illegal traders. We're running close to the end of our time here, and I'd like to wrap up with a couple of quick questions. Most of these issues we're discussing today are around the live trade in great apes, which is where there's tremendous value. But Ofir, you and your network have had tremendous success, alarming success recently, with seizures and confiscations of great ape skulls, chimpanzee and gorilla skulls. Can you give us a little bit of information as to what that trade is about and where it's going?
Yeah, first of all, it gives you the magnitude that we have exposed is really surprising. I mean, you can think that when we started looking into the trade in great ape skulls and bones, I could say that we had around 56 ape skulls seized in one country in Cameroon within 2 months. Okay, it's a snapshot of the magnitude and of this destruction. And we keep on having those seizures almost every month. We keep on having arrests of people who are trading in skulls, and it's never one skull. So it's always something organized, specialized, in large quantities. And the first we have seen was in Gabon, and when we saw it in Gabon, we understood that this is for rituals. That's the context in which it was put. Later, we've seen skulls in different contexts. Some of them are moving towards Nigeria to be sold as trophies. So until now, the demand is pretty mixed for that, but it does give you an idea. There are still illegal trades in apes parts that we saw only later on after focusing on different traffickers. So from live apes to meat of apes to even bones and skulls of apes, both for traditional practices within Africa, outside of Africa, and also as a trophy. And that goes completely international.
Well, let me ask the same question of you that I just asked of Bonaventure. Do you have any hope, or what is the reason for hope, perhaps, that we will be able to either catch up to or stop this illegal trade in time to save great apes? You work in regions such as Cameroon, where we have maybe 200, 300 cross-river gorillas left. Is there enough time to really make the impact and make the change we need to?
Thank you.
Well, the situation is grim, and it is getting worse. And you know, maybe the increased awareness is giving a source of optimism for people. That's not a source of optimism for us at all. So I believe that the only hope that we have will be to try to change the way we do business. Not to do things more or better, but to really rethink how we deal with law enforcement and get into a very quantified system that is based on how many traffickers we have in jail and a focus on enforcement on corruption. But in a much larger way, and probably for people who are watching us now or later, I would say that this is too much to ask. A fight is not worthy because you believe that you will be able to solve everything by yourself. We are activists. All of the projects that we have in 8 countries are all activists, African activists that are fighting, taking huge risks, many threats and life-threatening situations, because they want to change their situation and protect their heritage and build a new future for themselves. And I think that this should inspire others that try to understand what can we do about that. Because these activists are not asking themselves, can we succeed or not? They know they are the fighters. If there will be more fighters, we'll have better chances. But they are doing that and taking these risks, maybe against all odds, in carrying this fight, because they take their own responsibility. And if I had to look at countries around the world, or if I had to look at the booming trafficking everywhere else, I could sink into this desperation. And I can't ask for that hope. What I ask for is that I will take my responsibility and do the fight on my own. And whoever wants to join, whoever wants to be inspired from authorities around Africa, authorities outside, or somewhere in a country that never ever had while a prosecution, somebody jumps up and say, I'm a citizen, but I can make a difference, he will not ask himself, can he succeed? He will just do that because he accepts his responsibility to be a part of a change.
Well, great. Let me finish now with Claire and ask you the same question. You see data all day long. Traffic's job is to monitor the illegal trade in a number of species. Do you have hope? Do you think that the increased data and the sophistication that we're gaining is enough to stop illegal trade and certainly to save great apes in time?
I think we have to have hope. I think we cannot give up. I think we have to, increase communication and more people joining in and saying that this is really not acceptable. There's been a large increase in the amount of news stories and media coverage in general about the illegal wildlife trade, and it seems to be it's becoming more and more important at higher and higher levels of government. So yes, I think we do have to have hope. I think we must have hope, but it's the actions of individuals and not just of governments that will actually help to solve this.
Well, great. That's probably a very fitting place to end this GRASP webcast. I'd like to thank each of my guests, Ofir Drori, Claire Beastall, and Bonaventure Ebayi, for joining us today to discuss the illegal trade in great apes. I'm Doug Cress, the coordinator of the Great Ape Survival Partnership, and I thank you for joining us today to listen to this important topic. We'll be back with you again next month with another topic on GRASP webcast, The Experts Speak, and for now, have a good day. Thank you.